Hi, I'm Catherine.
And I'm Gail, and welcome to Women Over 70 Aging Reimagined, our award-winning weekly podcast. Visit womenover70.com to learn about how you may become involved and join Aging Reimagined Circle to enjoy free participation in our online monthly programs. Thank you for listening, and special thanks to Wells Fargo Advisors for their ongoing support.
And today we're very excited to be talking with Karen Joy Marienau, age 70. She's a seeker of adventure, learning, and well-being. Her fascinating journeys began when she left the farm in Minnesota after high school for 6 months to study and travel in Mexico. And over the next 50-some years, Karen became an RN, then a medical doctor, joined the Navy, where she specialized in undersea medicine, then in preventive medicine. She worked for the CDC. She lived in 7 states and traveled all 7 continents. Karen fully retired in December 2024 to spend more time with family, friends, and her dog Olive, and to do even more travel. She's been tapping into her creativity and love of working with her hands to remodel and update a recently acquired home on Minnesota's North Shore of Lake Superior, a place she's aptly named Pure Joy. So welcome, Karen, to Women Over 70. Full disclosure, I am Karen's older sister, and I've been waiting 5 years for her to become eligible to be on this podcast. So we're delighted to have you. And I wish we had more time to get into the details of your remarkable professional life, your world travels, your hobbies, the people that you hold dear. But this time we're going to try a more thematic approach to kind of talk about how adventure and learning and well-being seem to characterize choices you made in your life and how you structure your life. So regarding these things, Karen, tell us about what you see as what's the origin of your thirst for adventure and learning and well-being, and how how have you been able to keep this so central in your life all these years?
Well, I think my thirst for adventure really started in high school. My high school Spanish teacher showed slides and told stories of Mexico as part of her lesson plans. And in junior high, I had just happened to be assigned to take Spanish, and I turned out I loved it, and I had an aptitude for it. And so between my junior and senior high school years, I went to a language school in Mexico for a month. Well, that further stimulated that interest and, wanting to learn more about Mexico and experience more. And so as I was during my senior year, then I really didn't identify a career path. And so I decided to go to Mexico for 6 months after graduation. So I went for 6 months to a language school, traveled, talked a dear friend into going with me. And that experience really opened my world like nothing else before, and probably no one experience since. And so, yeah, I guess that started it.
Well, what about learning? And what about learning?
Well, I think part of loving to learn is just innate in my personality. But also, I always loved to read. Dad always read. You and Lori always read, and I liked school. You paved the way to college. Lori, by the time Lori and I were going to go, it was a given. We didn't have to fight to go. And I think your life examples and your gentle encouragement for me to nurture my intellect and other aspects of myself also really helped me pursue learning and wanting to learn. And I guess any adventures or travel, learning has always been part of that. And also just physical challenges that I've kind of sought out, they've required learning as well. And I don't know, I've always been drawn to learning new things and skills. And I think part of that might be because I like change. And so, like I've never stayed at one job for more than 3 years, except for my last one, which was with the CDC. And each new job required a lot of new learning, acquiring new skills. And so I think that's kind of how it worked out.
And
We've always, oh, go ahead, yeah.
we don't often hear people say, women say on this show, I love change. And so, keeping with what you're talking about, how do you see yourself as being fearless about loving change?
Well, I guess, I mean, I think I get bored, fairly easily. I mean, after I've really delved into something and learned and developed the skills, then I start to get bored. And so I think that stimulates seeking out change. I think also, I don't know, I think I like to be self-sufficient. And so I might think of something and it doesn't really dawn on me that I can't do it. I think I try to figure out how to do it, and there may be a lot of trial and error, but I usually can figure it out, although sometimes the end product is better than at other times. But so I think that's part of it.
Thank you. My sister.
Pardon? I'm sorry, I interrupted. What?
I think, Karen, you should be my sister.
Well, you would never know we're from the same family in terms of all the challenges she takes on, and especially around the physical, working with your hands and the way you accept physical challenges, and training with the Navy SEALs is one thing.
Well, that feels, but
Oh, that's my story. Okay. We'll correct that. But to talk about your sense of what gives you that sense of well-being, what's really important to you?
well, being active is a big part of my well-being. And I think part of that is just, it's also, even as a child, it was really hard for me to be still. And I think horror stories that mom and dad experienced because of that. But that's kind of continued throughout my life. And so being physically active helps calm that or satisfy that tendency. But it also then contributes to my feeling of well-being. So choices that I've made for recreation or even profession, like becoming a diving medical officer, it included physical challenges as well as the intellectual. And so I think that, just kind of fit into well-being.
Tell us what diving medical officer involves.
Well, it's in the Navy. It's a 6-month training program that includes submarine medicine and diving medicine. So I did that after I finished my first year of residency or my internship year, and so the diving, it was very physically challenged because to be a diving medical officer, we had to meet the same physical requirements that these young 20-year-old Navy divers did. And so then as a diving medical officer, there's different things in different paths I could have taken. And they all involved being able to run a recompression chamber. Like if somebody gets the bends, you may have heard of that. And then I ended up working in the Navy Experimental Diving Unit where we did studies on different aspects of diving, different diving rigs, deep diving. And so I worked with doctors, but also a lot of Navy divers. And some of them were toward the end of their career, some early in their career. But an interesting thing is that all of we doctors also had to be subjects in whatever studies we were doing.
Mm-hmm. What's the deepest dive that you were able to do?
Well, it was in a recompression chamber, and it was 185 feet. So the chamber is, it's compressed, and so it simulates being that deep. And then at that depth, when you're there for beyond a certain amount of time, you get saturated. And so then to decompress, it takes place at that depth, it took place over like a couple of days. So it slowly. But when we did deep dives studies there, they would be 800 or 1,000 feet. But I was not a subject for those.
Good. I'm glad to hear that. Um, so let's hear a little bit more about your professional trajectory and kind of what stands out for you as being, the most rewarding, the most interesting, challenging,
Yeah.
whatever.
Well, I certainly had a circuitous professional path. As you know, first I became a nurse, and it was even during my first year of nursing school that I realized I really wanted more, and I wanted to, go to medical school. And I ended up going into the Navy to get a medical school scholarship, and part of that was so that I could always be by water, but also because of that undersea medicine program. So while in the Navy, I had some really unique experiences. One, was being a diving medical officer, which was very rewarding and interesting and fun and challenging in many ways. But then eventually, it's a pretty small niche, and I started to not be as interested anymore. And then I did preventive medicine residency at the University of Washington, and that's very broad. It's preventive medicine and public health. And so my first job as a preventive medicine officer was in Hawaii. And that was probably my favorite place to live outside of Minnesota. But during that time, I got to travel to several places in the South Pacific, to Japan, Okinawa. And I suppose the most interesting aspect of that job was being part of this biological, chemical, and environmental and radiological teaching team, which was very interesting, but also kind of tedious at times. But anyway, then, but while I was doing it, but I liked it. But again, by the end of 3 years, I was ready to move on to something else. And so I guess I transferred from the U.S. Public Health Service from the Navy into the U.S. Public Health Service. And I ended up working with the CDC and got back to Minnesota, which by that time I wanted to get back to Minnesota. And I was working in an area that dealt with communicable diseases, pandemics, and I really liked that. And I became a expert in air travel and infectious diseases. So that was probably the highlight of my professional life until I started to get bored with it. And but that was my last full-time job, because I could have gone somewhere else, done something else within the U.S. Public Health Service, within CDC, or other agencies that use people in the U.S. Public Health Service to staff, but I didn't want to move again. And so I stayed at 8 years at that job, and then retired at 20 years because I didn't want to move again, and I didn't want to keep doing that job.
And how old were you when you retired?
58 and 3/4. But then I did do part-time work until just this past December.
What did that include?
Nothing that I ever would have thought I would do.
Imagine.
One, I did fitness for duty exams for federal agents. So that actually kind of went hand in hand with what I was doing as a diving medical officer.